Om Mani Padme Om. Om Mani Padme Om. Om Mani Padme Om. All right, everyone, welcome to the center, our Sunday service today. You'll notice we're a little bereft of monks today. I was telling people earlier that our monks are over in Anaheim participating in a special puja honoring Bhante Sumana's birthday. So they left me and Nam in charge today. Hope everything goes okay. But it's business as usual. So we will meditate together for a few minutes, and then today I'll be giving a Dhamma talk, and after we'll have some Q&A, and then today not only will we have tea, but it looks like we have some little mini muffins as well. So a special treat to end the service. But now let us begin our meditation. So let's get into a comfortable position. Close our eyes. And take 3 long, deep breaths. And now let us develop goodwill, loving kindness, metta, beginning with ourselves. This is a sincere and wholesome wish for our true and lasting happiness. We might think to ourselves, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May I live with a heart and mind unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May I look after myself with ease. And then we extend our goodwill, our loving kindness to our family, our friends, our mentors, teachers, and guides, those that we love, those that we respect, those that we admire. May they be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And then we extend our goodwill to our acquaintances, those that we like but don't know so well. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And then we extend our goodwill, our loving kindness to those that we have difficulty getting along with, those that we have difficulty admiring or respecting, even those that may call us enemy. may they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And so, in this spirit of admirable friendship with all beings, we extend our goodwill, our loving kindness in all directions. In front of us, behind us, to the right and left, above and below, outward into infinity, to all sentient beings everywhere. May we all be peaceful. May we all be happy. May we all be free from stress and pain. May we all be free from suffering. May we all live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May we all always look after ourselves with ease. And so now, with our hearts and minds uplifted with the metta that we've cultivated, let us turn our attention now to the breath. Ardent, alert, mindful, setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. We breathe in and we breathe out, sensitive to the quality of breath, sensitive to whether the breath is long or short, deep or shallow, heavy or light. And we might find it useful to ask ourselves what kind of breathing would be especially gratifying, refreshing right now, and see how the body responds. Allow the breath to become easeful, and then spread that sense of ease around throughout the body. Use this refreshing breath to unify body, heart, and mind in this singular activity. Keeping the mind fixed here so that it does not reach out for thoughts of the past or of the future, that it does not hold on to thoughts or fantasies that induce stress or anxiety. Every time you catch the mind wandering away, bring it back with an especially gratifying breath. See how long you can maintain your awareness of the breath, using the breath to string together moments of mindfulness, inducing skillful concentration, so that the mind becomes like a steady flame, luminous and firm, unwavering. Continue to meditate in this way, like a steady flame, until you hear the bell. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. You know, usually when Shanti is here, he'll introduce whoever's speaking. It feels a little weird to introduce myself. But just in case there are people who are watching online who don't know who I am or anyone else here, my name is Subodha, and I'm one of the Dhamma teachers here. I've been a lay minister and a teacher here at this temple now for a few years. So I will be the one giving the Dhamma talk today. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. I was reminded this morning that tomorrow is the autumn equinox. So for a lot of people, that'll be the beginning of fall. You know, even though Starbucks got a jump on them 2 weeks ago, there's already pumpkin spice lattes going around everywhere. But tomorrow, at least it'll start making a little more sense. And I was thinking on this, you know, partially, you know, as someone who, from the wilderness tradition, I have a particular fondness, affinity, love of nature. And even before I started practicing the wilderness tradition, I've always been drawn to nature and its beauty, being alone in nature, and seeing nature as a valuable teacher as well. And so looking at the equinox, I can also see a lesson in that, you know, the fact that there's a certain way that the earth tilts towards and away from the sun at any given time. For those of us on the northern hemisphere, we're entering into a time tomorrow when day and night will be entirely equal. And then it'll shift again. And the nights will get longer, the days will get shorter until we get to the winter solstice and all of that. And we can make lessons out of all of that stuff, you know, the idea of what it means to be balanced. You know, even this morning as I was facilitating the meditation, we were talking about the importance of being centered, of being collected, and how balance may be a good way of looking at that too. That as we sit to meditate and we're trying to tame the mind and develop skillful qualities, we're also learning how to be balanced. It makes me think of the quality of equanimity. When we talk about the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness or goodwill gets a lot of attention. Compassion also gets a lot. Sometimes it overshadows even loving kindness or goodwill. Empathetic joy tends to be like the middle child, kind of ignored. But equanimity, people have a weird thing with equanimity, I find sometimes, where either it's a thing that they entirely ignore about the path, or it's something that they think just is the goal of the path. You know, that we're cultivating as Buddhists for the sake of equanimity, that's what we're looking to be, equanimous all the time. From right now until the day we die, equanimous. But when we look at nature, we don't really see equanimity working that way, balance working that way. The sun and the planet, or our planet Earth and the moon, moving in particular ways throughout the seasons to different benefits. You know, we benefit from the seasons. We benefit from spring and summer, the same way we do autumn and winter. And so what that means, at least in my eyes, when we look at something like equanimity, we're looking at something that is useful in the proper season, but not necessarily all the time. I think I was reflecting on this after our visit, IBMC, we did a visit to Lakma to see the Realms of the Dharma exhibition. And we were looking at all these different figures in Buddhist iconography, Buddhist cosmology. All traditions were represented at least a little bit. There were Theravadan pieces, Mahayana, Vajrayana, Tibetan. There were pieces that were from Sri Lanka, from Thailand, from Vietnam. And as various members of the temple that were walking around, different conversations would pop up. And one of the things that came up was the 5 recollections, a particular chant that's very popular in Theravada. I don't know if it's as popular in the other traditions, but in Theravada it's something that I've chanted many times, whether it be a Sri Lankan temple, a Thai temple, and so on. And one of our members in particular was trying to learn the chant. And he was talking about how he had found a version that he liked, but the issue was that he just wanted to learn it all in Pali, and the recording he was listening to had it in Pali and English, back and forth, back and forth. And he was like, I just want it all in Pali so I can learn it. And I can relate to that. It can be a little tricky going back and forth with different languages and remembering which chant. In fact, even though I've chanted this one very many times myself, I struggle to just naturally recall the chant. If someone were right next to me and to start the chant, I would follow right in line. I'd know every single word. But if someone said, hey, you, Subodha, you lead the chant, I'd have to look it up myself. It's weird how the brain works. But this came up, and it's an important series of recollections. But like all of the things that the Buddha teaches us, some things are useful in certain ways, in certain doses, let's say. Some things are useful in the proper season, and some need to be looked through in the proper lens. So I think what I'll do first is share the recollections first, and I'm just going to say them for you all in English. So this is the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. I am subject to aging. Aging is unavoidable. I am subject to illness. Illness is unavoidable. I am subject to death. Death is unavoidable. I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and live dependent on my actions. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. We should often reflect on this. That's the chant. And so a couple days after the fact, this same person who's learning the chant sent along a recording of a Dhamma teacher from the Ajahn Chah lineage who was giving a talk on this chant. And so this was an interesting story of a man who, when he was young, in his early 20s, I can't remember exactly what age he was, he decided to travel to Thailand, to go to Ajahn Chah's monastery, and to go spend some time there being a monk. You know, the kind of guy that thought he was going to probably be a novice for like a few months and then go back to his life, and then he just ended up being a monk for the rest of his life. He's still giving talks as a monk now. But he was reflecting on this particular chant. But he only focused on the first 4 of the recollections, right? So he was looking at sickness, he was looking at old age, he was looking at death, and he was looking at the fact that we grow different and separate from all that is dear to us. But the last little bit he left out. And so he was focusing on those because he was reflecting on his time as a young novice, living at the monastery in a time when Ajahn Chah was very ill. Most people, when they see photos of Ajahn Chah, it's back when he was younger, he was a little healthier, and you know, he was never very strict about his robes, so it's often kind of hanging off a bit, and he's like posted up on a wall or just kind of hanging out, and he's kind of cute. Sometimes he's wearing his denture, sometimes he isn't, so he's got this cute little smile and everything. And so people love that. But the fact of the matter is he had a human body with all that comes along with it. And so towards the last few years of his life, he was mostly bedridden or taken around in a wheelchair. And towards the end, he lost the ability to speak. So he wasn't even talking to anyone either. And, you know, this monk was reflecting on his time as a novice there during a time when he was exposed to the teacher, but not able to get direction straight from the teacher. You know, here's the great patriarch of this lineage, just there bedridden most of the time. And so this young monk is reflecting on what it means to grow old, to grow sick, to die, to grow separate and different and all of that. And he's just like, wow, you know, it's just amazing what, you know, the amount of acceptance that Ajahn Chah had, the amount of equanimity he must have had to be able to face all those things. And, you know, that may be true to a certain extent, but, you know, the thing is that Ajahn Chah, by many of his students, is believed to have reached full awakening, that he was, towards the end of his life, a living arahant. And what that means is that if he had become an arahant, that he would have gone beyond the tools that the Buddha laid out. Because when we think of like the simile of the raft, the whole Eightfold Path and all the tools and techniques and skills that go along with it, they're all packed in there. The whole Bodhipakya Dhamma, the whole wings to awakening, all of the, was it 37 qualities or something like that? All of that gets set aside like the raft once one is going to cross the stream. So if Ajahn Chah had a mind that was liberated in that way, it wouldn't be so much that he was like really good at his equanimity. And it wouldn't necessarily be the case that he was like perfectly balanced. It's that he would have gone beyond all of those issues entirely. One of the really visceral examples of what that is like that the Buddha gives is that he says that someone who's become an arahant still exists in the world, but they exist disjointed. The example he gives is kind of chilling, but I guess it was the best way he could get to the example. He talks of taking a cow, and it's as if someone had managed to skin the cow perfectly so that everything just kind of comes off, and then the skin is put right back on. So it's connected but not connected. And that's how the arahant lives in the world, disjointed. So they can still experience the world, they're still in the world, but, you know, to quote a common phrase, in the world but not of it, in that way. So to what extent would he have needed equanimity in the face of his own suffering? To what extent was he suffering at all? And what really would have given him the most strength to have gotten to that place to begin with? As I said, this monk made what I view as a very common mistake of just focusing on those first four. And I think it's because those are the parts that we have the most trepidation towards. Because we really are afraid of old age. We really are afraid of sickness. We are afraid of death. We're very afraid of being separated from what we hold dear. But it's that other part that perhaps we don't acknowledge because we're afraid of that too, just in a different way. We don't want to own our actions. We don't want to be defined by our actions. We don't want to be heir to our actions, related through our actions, having our actions as our mainstay. You know, the thing is that when we look at the path, we want to simplify it in a way that it's only about letting go. That was the other example that this monk gave, that Ajahn Chah just had this ability to let go and let go and let go and let go. He was equanimous. But how did the Buddha mean for us to be equanimous? In what regard? If you look at what the Buddha taught, he oftentimes took something that was the end of a particular tradition. And what I mean is that in terms of means and ends, that you have means of a practice to reach a certain end. And he would take the ends of certain practices and say, actually, that's a means, not an end. And he did that with the Brahma Viharas as well. You know, there were certain people that practiced, and their whole practice was basically bhakti, just devotion and love and things like that. And the Buddha didn't say, that's useless. He goes, no, it's useful, but push further, go further, see it to its end. And he said the same of compassion. He said the same of empathetic joy. He said the same of equanimity. And it's also true of the entire path of it itself. The path is not an end. It's a path leading to an end. And that path is shaped by our intentions. It's shaped by our actions, what we think, what we say, what we do. And what that means is that someone like Ajahn Chah, whether he was a full arahant or even just approaching it, if he was going to define himself at all, it would be in that last part. He wouldn't have defined himself by his body, which was displaying sickness, old age, approaching death. And he wouldn't have defined himself in terms of his mind. Who knows what state his mind was in, but he wouldn't have really thought of himself in terms of that either. I think it's very strange that as Buddhists, we've tended to want to situate Buddhism around this big discussion on no self and hold it as extremely important in the scheme of things. But then at the same time say, well, you think you're a self, but what you really are the aggregates. Your form, your feeling, your perception, your volitional constructs or fabrications, your consciousness, and so on. And that's what you really are. And the irony of that is that when we look into the suttas, we see that that's exactly what we wake up to the fact we are not, right? In other words, as we become a stream enterer and onward, we stop identifying with the aggregates. We don't claim them as I, me, or mine, but instead start looking at them as processes, things that we're involved in, various ways we try to feed and satiate ourselves through sensuality and becoming and non-becoming, the various things that we crave. And so someone who becomes a stream enterer and onward, they're already breaking up their associations with those things, with those aggregates. And it's not that they don't define themselves by them, but rather they define themselves very weakly to them. And rather than looking at them as an end, looking at them as a means. The aggregates then become means of our escape, our liberation, our unbinding. That's how we end up using form and feeling and perception and so on. And all of that, because these are phenomena, because these are things that are acted upon through intention and will, go right back to action again. So that last part of these 5 recollections really cannot be left out. Because for those of us who are not yet arahants, even those of us who may be non-returners, once returners, stream enterers, or those just working our way up towards that, we have to understand in what regard we're defining ourselves, to what extent we're defining ourselves, and to what extent we apply things like equanimity, and what it is that we let go of as we're developing. So as we go through life, there are plenty of things that we need to let go of, and plenty of things we need to be equanimous about, right? Equanimous about. Often those things are outside of the mind and the heart, outside of our intentions. We can't control the body. We can't really control the brain, but we can control the mind. And I make that distinction because we have, at least in my tradition, examples of ajahns, forest monks who are teachers, who ended up in their later years getting dementia, Alzheimer's of different kinds. And they were, in at least some cases, one example, my teacher's teacher, for example, was able to, for the most part, maintain his mind despite his brain doing funny things. He would have a dementia episode and he would just sit down and meditate for a bit and let it pass. And then when everything felt clear again and he knew where he was and who he was and what was going on, then he would get up. And that was someone who then had truly mastered equanimity. It had gone beyond balance. It had become something that's really useful in the path and in life. It had become patience. He was patient with what was happening with his body. He was patient with what was happening with his brain, because he had aligned himself with his mind and his heart, his intentions and his actions. And he knew when to take action and when not to, right? If things were feeling a little too unstable, he would set aside a space for himself to sit until things felt stable again. And he'd get up and get back to what he was doing, which is a very powerful lesson, I think. So each of us, as we're practicing this path, might want to reflect on the fact that dispassion and letting go and equanimity are not something that you just paint across the entire face of your life, let's say. It's something used strategically in each of those cases. Letting go is something that we do strategically as well. When we're developing the path, even when we're sitting down to meditate, you'll often hear my instructions when we're sitting down to meditate, setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. That's the use of something like balance, poise, patience, equanimity. It's keeping in mind what needs to be set aside so you can do the real work inside, what's happening in your heart and mind. So I would like to think, I never met Ajahn Chah, of course, but I would like to think that someone in that position who's gone through years of training in that way, when their body stops working, they turn inward and see what's happening in the mind and in the heart. And that's also a place of action. We tend to think that action's only bodily, something that we do with our fingers, our faces, our arms, our limbs, and so on. Action happens within as well. There's so much activity happening right in here. And even in the internal aspect of the body, we only tend to also think of the body as something external as well. I've been having a series of discussions with a couple people lately in regard to Paticca that I've been talking about in my last talk a couple months ago. All of the various ways that we give rise to craving and clinging and suffering in the first place, and how we find our freedom from all of that, how we find our unbinding. And it's often through the same means, but used to different ends. And there's this whole issue of contact that comes up. We have these senses. We have our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body. Our mind is also considered a sense in Buddhism. And there are some people who think that contact is only an external thing. The senses reach outward, come into contact with the world, and that's where stuff is really happening. But there's also internal contact. The form that we have, there's also a sense of it from within. Even without the rest of the world, we have a sense of our own body. Feeling also has an internal component. Perception, fabrication, and consciousness are extremely internal as well. They're aspects of name, or in other words, the internal mind, heart. And all of that is to say that even as we sit down to meditate, as meditators, as Buddhists, there is always activity and always action happening, even if the body itself is not moving. All of those aggregates, all of those factors, those aspects that we can pick up at the appropriate time to say, yes, I will define myself by this and not that. We can do that all right here, sitting here, all of that activity, all of that action. So even as we reflect on the 5 recollections and at the very end, focusing on action, we need to have a very broad sense of what action is too, because action is not always what's happening externally. Action can also be what's happening internally. And so that means that for the Venerable Ajahn Chah, even as he was sitting there, a lot was happening internally. And some of his students were aware of that. But I would hazard a guess that if he was as advanced as most people believe him to be, it was more than just this sense of letting go. It was more than just this sense of equanimity. It was the entire path established in his mind and his heart, so that he could be truly free, even free from equanimity, which is a weird way to think for those of us who are still on the path. But I think that highlights how much we have left to go. We want to let go of everything, including the path, right away. That's not how letting go works. That's not how dispassion works. What that means is for those of us who are on the path right now, we may develop dispassion towards old age, sickness, death, dispassion towards the fact that things might be taken from us. I might go into the parking lot later today and not see my car there, you know? Who knows? But what I'm going to cling to right now as a Buddhist, what I am going to be passionate about are my actions, internal and external. What I think, what I say, and what I do. Because that's my mainstay. That's my very means of achieving liberation. And it's yours too. So I'll end my talk there. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts? It might be helpful to have a discussion. Yeah.
It's crazy that you're bringing up equanimity. I was actually going to ask a question about equanimity before. I'm like really struggling with. I've learned about it like since I was 12. Like I've been practicing it for a lot of my life, but now I find it that much more difficult, especially with everything that's going on in the world with politics and everything, and even in my own life. Like I got into an argument with a friend recently, and they haven't spoken to me in over a week. So there's just like all these opportunities for me to practice equanimity, and the older I get, I think the more questions I have about it. And I know that the Buddha tried not to get super involved in politics, and was very strategic about when he was involved. And so I try to remember that, and then I've also learned from other people who say things like the only way to be against war is to not choose a side. And so I'm just reflecting a lot on what that actually means. And it's confusing because right now the options that at least I am aware of, at least in America, are the left and the right. And so it's hard to be equanimous when I agree so much with one side. And anyway, it's just kind of confusing about how to take actions that I agree with and also not get super fearful and angry when other people don't agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering your thoughts on how to navigate that.
Yeah. You know, we're fortunate that the Buddha gave us so many tools to use. You know, when I was a little kid, I remember one of the gifts that my father gave me at one point was one of those Swiss Army knives. You ever seen those?
Yeah.
Where it's got like really cool stuff in there. Arguable how practical some of this stuff is, because like you pop a little toothpick out and then there's little scissors and all these other things. You know, it can be helpful to look at, well, the entire path as kind of a Swiss Army knife. But even just in terms of the Brahma Viharas, in terms of what the examples you were bringing up, right? You know, it's this sense that equanimity is like the tool, but it's one tool in a Swiss Army knife. So what that means is that when you're trying to feel equanimous and you're finding it really difficult, you probably need to start using something else as well, right? You know, if we reflect on like the full sense of the Brahma Viharas, you know, the meditation I lead often only looks at the metta part, the loving kindness and goodwill. But the equanimity part is oftentimes understanding that people are responsible for themselves. And you're not responsible for other people, meaning that, like, there's an example that the Thai forest Ajahn Lee brought up, which he goes, you know, you're able to open your own eyes, but like you can't look across the room and make someone close or open their own eyes, right? Only they can open their eyes, right? So you can't just like, okay, close them, open them, close them. Nope, not working, right? So I will say that, like, let me put it this way. There are the conflicts that are happening right now. Being equanimous doesn't mean not taking a side, right? Being equanimous means having patience for outcomes outside of your control, right? So it might be helpful to look at it in terms of patience. Not just in terms of outcomes, but also in terms of actions. What can you do right now? If there's nothing you can do right now, be patient until there is an action you can take. And then patiently waiting, you also have to apply your discernment, your wisdom to go, okay, that's an action worth taking. But then again, you still have to be patient in regard to outcomes. You can't control outcomes and you can't control other people, right? In the meantime, as you're being patient, you have these other tools. You have your goodwill that you have for yourself. That means that what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're saying, and what you're doing is for the sake of your long-term welfare and happiness and the long-term welfare and happiness of others. That becomes your compass. That defines then how you are compassionate towards yourself and others, in what regard you have joy in the good fortune of yourself and others, and equanimity, how you apply it in terms of patience, in terms of poise, in terms of endurance and persistence. All of these are so much more multifaceted when we look at them that way, working together and working at different times and stages, working in season, right? Just like the sun and the moon. Sometimes balance is necessary. Sometimes we need a little more heat. Sometimes we need a little more cool. And that's what you're doing with yourself as you practice the Brahma Viharas, right? Think of them in that way, working together at the right time. Anything else? Yes?
I have some friends that they're not Buddhists, but they respect Buddhism, and they're done some research, and one day we were talking about something similar to like 5 recollections, and they said, how can you think like that? I'm subject to disease, I'm subject to aging, there's no joy in that, thinking that way. And then I remember a long time ago, I had read, it was a kind of a Japanese poetry, where the whole theme was about finding the beauty in the transience of things. So my question to you is there a joy in dispassion, in non-clinging, in looking at the world in like how transient and ephemeral it is, that I can maybe tell them this is the joy, or what would you say? Is there a joy?
Yes and no, right? I'll say it this way. Can there be a sense of beauty in the fact that things are transient? Sure, right? But that beauty is often very bittersweet, right? And the Buddha would say something along the lines of this. Yeah, it is beautiful, it is nice, it can be very bittersweet, but aren't you tired of that bitter? Wouldn't you rather give that bitter up, right? And so what that means is that yes, there are things that can be enjoyed in the world. That's really clear. That's actually part of the problem, right? When we talk about Buddhism, we tend to focus on stress, pain, suffering, dukkha, and think that that's the lesson, that the world is just awful and it's miserable and a bad place to be. But the thing is, if that were true, like fundamentally, viscerally, if we really felt that, we wouldn't need the teachings in the first place because we would naturally let go if things were really that bad. It's far trickier and more pernicious than that. The issue is that we do find the beauty in all of that. We do find something alluring that holds us to it. We find the craving and clinging, even the things that from an arhat's perspective would seem entirely a waste of time, right? So the issue partially is that we're already caught up in this bittersweet beauty. We feed ourselves on it all the time. So it's not bad to acknowledge that, but that's part of our duty as a Buddhist, to look at the origination of things happening in the world and in our mind and our hearts, looking at how they come to be, understanding their cessation as well, how they're broken down and fade away, looking at the allure, and then looking at the drawbacks. And then that's when we look at the letting go, the abandoning of those things. So yes, the world is very alluring, but we're often not able to truly see to what extent we're finding it alluring, even these things that seem bad, right? For example, we see old age as something bad until we don't, right? Oftentimes as we start getting into old age, we're like, actually, it's pretty good. Look how dumb the youth of today is. If they were as old and wise as us, they would know how great, that kind of stuff, right? Sickness and death, there are people who champion that stuff all the time if it happens to the right person, right? Someone gets a diagnosis, for example, like say a particular politician ends up being very sick with something. And then a particular side is like, ha 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 ha, he's sick with blank, right? And then death, ooh, people have been championing death forever, right? Celebrating it. So the issue is that we're already kind of excited about these things in different ways, or trying to find the beauty, or convincing ourselves of the beauty. The Buddha is asking us to see these things as essentially candy, short little bursts of happiness, and then they're gone. And the lesson is to exchange that candy for gold. So we're working up a ladder in terms of sense of meaning, importance, and what gives us pleasure or happiness. The opposite of dukkha, sukha, right? Happiness and peace, bliss. So, you know, other people might hear the reflections and go, oh my God, that's terrible. And other people might hear them and go, wow, like, isn't it just the way it is? Like the world is just, it's like this, man. You know, and that's kind of cool too. But that's why that last part is important, because that's where we take the delight. That's the happy part of the 5 recollections. It's not that old age is necessarily happy in and of itself. And the same of sickness and death, or about being removed from all the things that make us happy. Action, the fact that we have free will and the ability to change these things in regards to our long-term welfare and happiness, the fact that we can become unbound and liberated, that's the happy part of those recollections. That's the sweet part, whether or not the other 4 are bitter, sweet, or a mixture. The fact that we have our actions to rely on, which means we have a means of unbinding, that's the part we become happy about, right? So in terms of equanimity, to bring it back together, equanimity is oftentimes something we apply to the circumstances of life itself. It's not what we apply towards our actions, right? Because we want to make sure that what we're doing is for our long-term welfare and happiness. So it's not that we necessarily go, well, it's fine that I said this, it's fine that I thought that. No, you want to have just enough equanimity to have patience for yourself and your actions. But it has to be paired with the Buddha's other teachings in regard to discernment, knowing what is skillful and unskillful, and always choosing the skillful. You're not going to be perfect at it every time, but you want to make sure that that's the trend you're going towards. So we're not after the bittersweet. We can use the bittersweet to find the ultimate sweetness, right? We can think about it in that regard, which is a more nuanced understanding that gets beyond just accepting the transience of life. We're actually looking at something that's beyond space and time, which is not transient, right? Being outside of space and time, it's not even constant. We lose all words for it. It's beyond words, beyond concepts, right? Better than transient, long-term, perpetual, right? All right, I will end my thoughts there. I think there's only time for maybe one more question if there's something that came up. Yes?
I don't know whatever I've done with my life. I can't remember most of it. But I do find that today I am enjoying being in the group. And I'm enjoying your Dhamma. I'll take a little win. And then I'm very, very grateful because your integration, your presentation of the wisdom of integration in life is beautiful. It's helping to keep me well today relative to whatever comes my way. And I'm very grateful for that. And so, thank you so very much.
Well, I'm grateful too. Yes.
I just wanted to comment because like every time that you have a question, you always express gratitude. And they say that gratitude is the parent of all virtues, but it's also contagious. And thank you.
It's a beautiful reminder. Thank you both. All right, let's chant together page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. When ye tu con đức phổ cập ơn nhã tế nhã đằng được trong sang nghe gai công thái phà đạo. When ye tu con đức phổ cập ơn nhã tế nhã đằng yu trong sang nghe gai công thái phà đạo. When ye tu con đức phổ cập ơn nhã tế nhã đằng từ trong sang nghe gai công thái phà đạo. Om Mani Padme Hum. Thank you very much. May you all be well, happy, and peaceful.